to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The former boss of Hamas has called for a day of rage tomorrow. Now, it's designed to be for Muslim and Arab states, but could there be a spillover into this country as well? We'll debate the BBC. Why on earth will they not call Hamas terrorists? And they refer to them often as fighters, as if there is something noble in what they're doing. We'll talk about the fact that our jails are completely full and rapists may not be sent there. And I'll ask, why are the do-gooders trying to ruin the Grand National? But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight is the developing story. It is that the UK is sending spy planes and 2 Royal Navy ships on deployment to the Eastern Mediterranean in new plans have been announced by Downing Street in the last 10 minutes to support Israel. The aircraft will begin patrols tomorrow to track threats to regional stability, such as the transfer of weapons to terrorist groups, we are told. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak saying the British military will be supporting and preventing further escalation in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The British Armed Forces will be on standby to deliver practical support to Israel and partners in the region and offer deterrence and reassurance. So that news just into us that the British are deploying to the Eastern Mediterranean in support of Israel and indeed finding a more peaceful settlement to the Middle East conflict. Now, the government's also organising flights for British nationals in Israel, with the first flight due to leave today. We have been trying to find out if that flight has got off the ground yet, but we are still unable to get you the correct information as yet. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, is urging British citizens who wish to get out of Israel to register their presence. Those eligible have been told not yet to go to airports unless they're instructed to do so. Now, the Palestinian president today condemned violence against civilians. As the sound of rocket fire rang out across Gaza City, Mahmoud Abbas said the killing or abuse of civilians contravenes morals, religion and international law. His comments came as vital medical supplies run dangerously low in Gaza. The International Red Cross warning the situation is deteriorating fast. The only remaining power station stopped working yesterday in Gaza City, and fuel supplies that are keeping generators going at night are also dwindling. They could run out today. Well, the US Secretary of State has described the Hamas terror attack from last Saturday as depravity in its worst. Speaking during his trip to Israel today, he reassured the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that as long as America existed, Israel would never have to defend itself on its own. The Israeli Prime Minister insisted Hamas should be treated in exactly the same way as ISIS. Antony Blinken said he knows the terrorist group Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people or their legitimate aspirations. Those were his words. Well, in news away from the Mideast conflict, an MP for the Scottish National Party defected today to the Conservative Party amid reports of a toxic and bullying culture in the party's Westminster group. Lisa Cameron's defection comes as she was facing a selection battle to be the candidate for a seat in the west of Scotland. She said she'd been a victim of group bullying at Westminster and had even suffered panic attacks as a result. Well, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, said today he was delighted Ms Cameron had joined the Scottish Conservatives. And finally, Bernie Ecclestone has been handed a 17-month suspended sentence after pleading guilty to fraud today. The ex-Formula One boss will also have to pay £652 million to HMRC. He appeared at London's Southwark Crown Court this morning after failing to declare more than £400 million of overseas assets to the government. The billionaire turns 93 later this month. He had been due to face trial in November after he'd previously denied the charge. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, the British government have not taken long to get involved. We're sending 2 Royal Navy vessels. There'll be Royal Marines on board, and perhaps even more significantly, we'll be setting a couple of spy planes, which will be flying over the region to see how Hamas are being rearmed. And all of this as 100,000 Israeli soldiers and reservists are lined up opposite Gaza for what inevitably is going to be a major ground invasion. And however grim you think the news has been this week, I think it's quite easy to predict. By this time next week, it will be grimmer still. And amongst all of this, a former leader of Hamas, a former founder of Hamas, Khalid Mashal, has called for tomorrow to be a day of rage. It is to stand up, to demonstrate, to study, and to understand what jihad is. Now, these comments have been aimed, and he was quite specific, they've been aimed at Arab and Muslim countries. But there is great concern in other parts of the world. For example, in Amsterdam, all of the Jewish schools will be closed tomorrow. In London, we've heard, 2 Jewish schools will be closed tomorrow. 1,000 extra Metropolitan Police will be patrolling predominantly Jewish areas. And into all of this, the Community Security Trust, who measure anti-Semitic attacks, report a significant rise over the course of the last few days. So the question, I guess, is just how worried should we be? Please give me your thoughts, farage@gbnews.com. I have no idea whether there will be spillover, but I'm certainly concerned. Let's go live to Tel Aviv and join Charlie Peters, GB News' reporter there. Charlie, good evening. First things first, what is the military situation today?
Well, the situation in general in Israel is such that IDF commanders said this morning that we might see the quiet before the storm down in the south. In the northern region, we had more shelling coming over from southern Lebanon and shelling from Syria. And we saw the first strikes by the Israeli Air Force outside of Israel, hitting 2 airports in Syria, Damascus and Aleppo International Airport. In the south and in the last hour, we have seen a huge rise in rocket attacks, hitting the town of Beersheba east of the Gaza Strip. And as you said in your intro, a significant force still gathering in the south off the border of the Gaza Strip for that likely ground incursion, as over 100,000 troops gather there. The main challenge for the military, though, across the country is to sustain them. We've seen reports today and spoken to IDF soldiers who say they're just not getting all the kit they need. They're relying on civilians and charities to bring them basics: body plates, body armour, boots, military equipment, stuff that an army really needs to engage in this sort of massive violence across itself when it's dealing with this existential risk.
Press conference this morning between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. How much help have the Americans indicated that they are prepared to give?
Well, the Americans are here, it seems, to both extend a humanitarian hand in trying to use its diplomacy to engage in that border crossing with Egypt, but also to sharpen Israel's spear by providing what it called advanced munitions to forces in the south. They were very clear, though, Antony Blinken saying earlier today that it was his position to express moral clarity and to combat what Benjamin Netanyahu described as ISIS-style butchery. The Americans say they will stand firmly with Israel in order to allow it to defend itself. Many people have said that Israel has a right to defend itself, but people in Israel say they have to defend themselves. This is the worst violence they've seen for 50 years.
Yes, and so many, Charlie, as I touched on last night with you, many in the international community saying, Israel, please don't overreact. But, I mean, given what's just happened to them, what are they supposed to do? Do you have any guess as to when you think Israeli forces will go physically into Gaza?
Well, I think it's a minimum of 48 hours at this stage. It's a realistic possibility that that first invasion, the first ground invasion of the Gaza Strip since 2014, will occur in that period, because a significant amount of shaping and sustaining of the ground still needs to be done. The logistic supplies to those forces in the south are required. No doubt the Americans involved in that very seriously, but also Hamas needs to be beaten back into their shelters inside the Gaza Strip. They are knocking hundreds of targets every night, the Israeli Air Force, with their airstrike capabilities, hitting air defense assets, but also personnel and senior commanders up and down the Strip. That will have a significant effect on preparing the way for any ground invasion, but still so much to be done. And people in Israel starting to really recognize that when that ground invasion occurs, all those shelters where members of Hamas, the terrorists, have been hiding, they will suddenly become traps for heavy armour and all the unwieldy forces that will be pouring into the Gaza Strip should that invasion occur in the coming days.
Charlie Peters, thank you once again for your live report from Tel Aviv. As I say, I think by this time next week, the war will be bigger and far worse than it is now. Let's hope that I'm wrong. Now, Josh Howie is a columnist for the Jewish Chronicle, but he's also a GB News presenter. You'll see him on headliners, and he's witty and he's funny, but he hasn't come in tonight to discuss a particularly amusing topic. Josh, welcome to the programme. I chatted at the beginning here about this day of rage that's been encouraged by one of the founders and former leaders of Hamas. Now, even though he said that it was designed to happen in Arab and Muslim countries, all over London, people are starting to take precautions. Share with us, how much concern is there in the Jewish community?
It's a huge amount of concern. I mean, first of all, thank you for letting me on before 11 p.m. That message went out, and then he's had to sort of quantify it. Oh, we just mean in the Arab countries, we don't mean Jews everywhere around the world. By the way, Arab countries having been ethnically cleansed of their 1 million Jews since the creation of Israel. But it's scary. It's not just that. We just heard two Jewish schools in North London have closed. My kids go to a Jewish school, 2 Jewish schools. They are remaining open, but all the way through this week, there's just been constant emails between the parents on the WhatsApp groups from the school to us. Security has been picked up, and it's mental that we live in a society where nursery schools require guards. I mean,
So will your kids go to school tomorrow?
They will go to school because I don't want them at home. But we'll do security and keep them safe. And also, it's a way of. I don't feel like we should give in to these people, we shouldn't have to change our lives.
But you have had to change your life, haven't you? As you say, security guards are part of the norm now for kids going to school, Jewish schools in North London.
But I just mean even walking down the road, having my Star of David out. It's like I'm sort of constantly fluctuating between fear of being attacked, and we've seen anti-Semitic incidents increase 300-400% over the last few days.
I mentioned that. Yeah.
And I was at the vigil in front of the in front of Number 10 on Monday, and it was a peaceful, solemn affair to mourn the more than 1,000 people who were, slaughtered in a way that we can't even imagine.
No.
And I took a different route home, and thank God I did, because if I hadn't, I would have been caught in the middle of people swinging from lampposts and setting off flares and fireworks and chanting, "Oh, your Jews are dead, good."
It was a celebration. It was called. All the media called it a protest, but I called it out. It was actually a celebration that was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And to see that, and again to see that within our society, and to see the police sort of standing by with all this hatred going on, and that seeing stuff like that is, of course, it's terrifying, and it's look. Me and you, we haven't actually met before. Hello.
I know. I just see you later on telly.
Yeah, you see. And vice versa. But we disagree politically. This is beyond.
Oh, it's way beyond that.
Politics. This is
way beyond that.
And I don't want to maybe exaggerate or something. This is a war for liberal democracy. It doesn't. When we disagree about how our country should be run and those things here, but this goes to the ethos of what is our country. What is it to be British? And it's about fairness, and it's about being able to live your life freely.
We're seeing some live shots in Gaza. There was an explosion a few moments ago. No, of course, the point about living in a liberal democracy is that we agree to disagree, and then we have elections or referendums, and that's the result. And whether we like it or not, that is the result, and that's how we do things. Let's call this out, Josh, for what it really is. What is actually happening is pure racial hatred, isn't it?
100%. And for many years now, Jews have been saying that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It's another excuse for it. We've seen it. We're talking about thousands of years' worth of this hate. It just doesn't go anywhere, and it always has a different excuse to reappear, whether it was religion, then it comes back as some sort of racial purity, and now it's coming back as Israel being the... And it's insane to have to explain to your children what it is about them.
That must be very difficult.
I wish people could just come in to see my kids' school, primary school, to come to our synagogue. It's all about peace. It's about making the world a better place. These are literally the rules by we live our life. And I understand there are many reasons this anti-Semitism that exists, and it's so pernicious. But I guess the thing that's most frustrating for me as someone on the left is fellow progressive travellers, to see them joining in and to say, as you say, celebrating the death.
It wasn't just Corbynism.
No,
there've been other strands on the extreme end of the Labour Party going back decades that have actually used this anti-Zionist narrative, as you said yourself a moment ago, as a cover for what
it all
really
comes
is.
from Russian propaganda. There are reasons for it going into academia and whatnot. The point is, when it gets to this level where we are seeing the barbarism, on a scale that we can't really imagine. I've even seeing photos and the demanding for people online. It didn't happen. They want to see it. They want to see the dead. We have to showcase our dead babies to somehow appease these people. It's unbelievably disgusting. Their humanity, but again, it's coming from people on what I would term my side, and that is horrific. People in my, I'm a stand-up comedian. Obviously, I'm not being funny right now.
No.
I'm not going to try this material on Saturday night. But this is, in that industry, you're seeing it. And you're seeing it unforgivable. Of course, and it's the whataboutery. And also it's the hypocrisy as well. When you compare it to other progressive movements and to see people here, the celebration.
But this, we're dealing here also, I said pure racial hatred, but we're dealing here with extremist, fundamentalist Islam, aren't we? And I never, ever think that it makes sense to compare anything to Nazism, ever. But in this case, actually, the mindset's quite similar, isn't it?
Yeah, Nazis actually tried to hide their crimes.
Yeah, it's true.
And
this lot put it on Facebook.
They're proud of it. They're celebrating it. This is not an original thought here. I've seen other people say it, but we are making a mistake of trying to impose our Western ideals onto Hamas and their ilk, because we can't apply our reasoning and our logic.
No.
Everybody, you would hope, most people want the world to be better. We want fairness. That's, I argue, would say the one word that would define being British. The difference is how would we go about that fairness?
Yeah.
But this isn't like that. This is, as you say, it's hatred. It's tied in with dogma.
How have we come to this in this of all countries? Well, of all countries,
you see Suella Braverman, again, someone I don't agree with on many, many things, but you see her now having to tell the police, you got to shut this down.
Do something.
You know, when a year or so ago, driving through North London, were cars draped with Palestinian flags and men shouting, "We're going to rape your mothers, we're going to rape your sisters," and whatnot. And then they're found and they're let go, never charged. That's how it happens. It happens because a teacher who has gone to every possible length to cover himself to protect his students, but to have a discussion, is then forced to go into hiding because of death threats. And let go. It's because a child drops a Quran and is then having to be paraded in front of the media, his mother shamed, and the police nodding along. We live in a liberal democracy.
We've appeased all of this, haven't we?
This has been incremental steps.
Yeah.
So to the point where 1,000, 1,200 people, babies, murdered, beheaded, children, I'm sorry to say, attacked sexually, kidnapped, and yet thousands of people go onto our streets. And it's not just here, it's across the liberal... We have, in Australia...
Oh, it's happening in Paris as we speak.
You know, hundreds of people shouting outside, "Gas the Jews."
Yeah.
This doesn't happen just overnight. This happens incrementally because we are not protecting our values appropriately.
Josh, I think you're absolutely right.
And that's all we're ever going to agree on.
Well, you never know. You never
We'll
know.
see.
But thank you for coming on and putting the case as passionately as
Thank you. Well,
have.
thank you for having me.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Well, language is very, very important, as Josh and I just agreed. Why is it that the BBC refused to call Hamas terrorists? In fact, they often refer to them as Hamas fighters, as if somehow they are very, very noble. Well, ex-BBC veteran Roger Bolton and I will discuss that in just 2 minutes' time.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, "Alexa, play GB News." We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And I struggled on Sunday morning listening to the BBC News at 6 o'clock in the morning when they talked about Hamas, but they didn't talk about them as terrorists. No, they called them militants. Later on that day, I heard them described as fighters, and there's been one hell of a row going on. A letter sent to Lord Grade, the boss of Ofcom, by some very, very prominent barristers, saying, for goodness sake, just look at the Terrorism Act of 2000. Look at what the definitions of this are. What is going on? Now, John Simpson, BBC veteran, has defended this by saying, but if we call them terrorists, it means we're taking sides. Well, Roger Bolton is a BBC veteran, a Radio 4 presenter, Panorama editor, and now does his own podcast called Beadwatch. Roger, we know with every big issue the BBC will get criticised for whatever it says or whatever it does. But it seems in this case that the barbarism that was committed on Israeli soil, I mean, I don't see how the BBC can't describe that as being terrorist.
It can, and it has described it as being a terrorist act, but there's a difference between talking about the acts themselves and then labelling the organisation a terrorist organisation. Now, the reason the BBC doesn't do that is it's a worldwide organisation, and what it wants to do, it wants people around the world to believe that it doesn't take sides, it reports, because there are a whole range of people in the Arab world will not want to believe the reality of what Hamas did. And if the BBC starts to use terms like calling it a terrorist organisation, they'll say, look, the BBC is taking sides. What the BBC's job is to report and to say, yes, that was an act of terror. Look at this. But also, you know, look at what's happening now in Gaza. Look at the absence of water and other things. And the BBC needs to report from there, though it's more difficult. The point is trust. In the end, the BBC wants to be trusted to be impartial. But impartial doesn't mean you don't take sides when you see dead bodies. You say they're dead bodies. You say if they have been beheaded, they've been beheaded.
Yeah, John Simpson's words perhaps were misunderstood in that context. He was saying the BBC never takes sides.
Well, that's the problem with the BBC is appalling at actually explaining these things, and it often resents the fact it has to explain them. But, you know, it's understandable that if people see the horrors, why should they understand this distinction and the need, or the BBC's perceived need, what I share, to be regarded as impartial? It's trust. And I say, you know, in arguments like this, there's a group of people just waiting to say, see, the BBC's biased. You've somehow got to get the information across to them.
I guess the problem is that for a domestic British audience, and with Hamas being a prescribed terrorist organisation, can you see why our viewers are getting quite upset about this?
Yes, I think so. And it reminds me very much of the situation in Northern Ireland, where, you know, particularly after things like Bloody Friday and a whole range of events where the IRA committed atrocities, acts of terror, there was a desire to say it's terrorism. And I remember Mrs Thatcher and Bernard Ingham, her press secretary, saying to me and to others, you know, come on, call it out for what it is. The problem is, it's militant Republicans committing acts of terror. And if you simply call them terrorists, those who support them, you know, will not listen to you. You needed to explore why they're behaving in that way, what is their rationale, and expose what they're doing. If you simply say they're terrorists and you use this appalling phrase, meaningless, it's not meaningless. You know, we should reject their meaning, But what Hamas is doing now is not meaningless. It's carefully calculated to create the most appalling reaction from Israel. And then, if they're lucky, Hezbollah invading from the north, and away we go. So I think, what you need is a news organisation that's calm, dispassionate, doesn't use terms like terrorist easily, but does say these children have been appallingly killed. Okay. And this is an act of terror.
All right, Roger, thank you. Final thought. Modern age, streaming, we pay for this, we pay for that, we choose what we watch, what we consume. The licence fee can't last for long, can it?
No, what we've got, I think the licence fee is a secondary thing. The first thing is there a role for a public service broadcaster? Yeah. Secondly, how do you provide it? Third, how do you pay for it? So we can argue about how you pay for it, but there should be somewhere an organisation which tries to be impartial. Because then people like you can be a bit more partial as long as there is this central organisation. We don't want to go the Fox route, where, as you know, in a recent court case, it was revealed that Murdoch and his chief executives and his presenters lied about Donald Trump winning the election. 80% of Republican voters believed them, and yet all the private documents show that Murdoch and his associates know that was a lie.
And that's what the court decided.
Yeah, and so what we don't want is Fox over here, and if you're going to have Fox over here, and you're nowhere near Fox, let's make sure there's a BBC as well.
All right, Roger, absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. We're now going to go to Jerusalem to join Ambassador David Friedman, who, of course, was the US ambassador to Israel for many years, up until 2021. Ambassador, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. You were at the heart of this incredibly successful negotiation, the Abraham Accords, which I think was Trump's great sort of testament to his foreign policy during his years as president. And as I understand it, a deal with Saudi Arabia was very, very close to happening. Do you think part of Hamas's motivation is to break this down?
Well, I think it's certainly a part of Iran's motivation, and I think Iran controls Hamas. I'm not sure Hamas has any independent will or capacity outside of its funding and direction by Iran. So sure, I mean, this was incredibly threatening to Iran. And, I think that this was undoubtedly a motivation. The Hamas part of it, they're just barbaric thugs who murder, rape, and destroy and kidnap innocent people. But Iran, I think, was very much interested in, and they succeeded. And at least for the short run, they've succeeded now. There won't be any normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia in the next, certainly not in the next 6 months.
No. I can see that very, very clearly. Now, you must have noticed that all around the world, there are people at the UN and in senior positions of government saying to Netanyahu's government, or now national government that they formed, that they must use restraint. And yet, given the barbarism that's just been inflicted upon them, it's very difficult. Is it possible that Israel can show restraint? And actually, isn't their job now to go and deal with Hamas?
I don't know, how much restraint did the UK show when Hitler attacked? I mean, is that would that have been a good strategy? I mean, I don't think so. I think everybody would be speaking German right now across the European continent. Look, no, absolutely no restraint. This is not the time to manage a conflict the way Israel has done over the past 10 or 15 of these episodes. They degrade Hamas. 2-3 years later, they come back stronger than ever. And this is the time to defeat Hamas, to kill each and every terrorist. They're doing it for themselves. They're doing it for the people of Gaza who are oppressed by Hamas. They will be perhaps an unintended beneficiary of that. They're doing it for the entire world because in this day and age, you don't know how many of these agents are all around. They're in everybody's midst, and they need to be defeated. The same approach that was taken against the Nazis is the right approach here. I don't see any difference. I mean, these are people who have committed the worst attack against the Jewish people in 75 years. It wasn't a Holocaust because it was only one day, but it was a day out of the Holocaust, and it can't happen again.
The one problem here, of course, Ambassador, is that a ground operation, street by street, building by building, in the very overpopulated, heavily populated Gaza, it will mean many civilian casualties, won't it?
Well, look, I heard either President Biden or one of his team speak about the importance of Israel adopting the laws of war. Well, the laws of war, which I've studied, provides that when a civilian, and by the way, I think you're being charitable calling these people civilians because, they voted for Hamas. They're cheering on the streets. They're handing out candies right now, looking at pictures of dead babies and raped women. So, I'm being charitable by calling them civilians. But nonetheless, when terrorists are embedded within civilians, when civilians provide them with aid and comfort and safe passage and sustenance and a place to hide, they're in harm's way. I mean, that's the law.
I'm sure you're right. I'm sure there are, people in Gaza that are supporting Hamas, but I bet there are plenty that don't as well. And a final quick thought, if I may. We heard the Egyptians saying they'd given the Netanyahu government intelligence. Been reports that even the Saudis gave them some intelligence. Was this a big, big failure by the Israeli government?
Well, it was a big failure because it happened regardless of whether the intelligence came or not. I mean, Israel doesn't depend upon, Egyptian intelligence, but Israel is better than this, of course. And I think everyone is in shock that this fence, which hadn't been breached in 50 years, was breached in this manner. There's time to do that post-mortem. Right now, we got to win the war, and then we'll figure out how to make sure it never happens again.
Ambassador Friedman, thank you very much for joining me live down the line from Jerusalem. Thank you. In a moment, our prisons are full. We can't even send rapists to prison. It seems almost unbelievable, but sadly, it's true. All of that in a couple of minutes.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Judges in England and Wales have been told that from next week, when people are convicted of burglary or even rape, they will not go straight to prison because the prisons are full. How on earth have we got ourselves into this extraordinary mess? Well, Rhys Rosser is a criminal barrister at law firm 2 Bedford Row. Rhys, I mean, it's almost unbelievable.
It is and it isn't, Nigel, because the signs have been there for a number of years. We had a Court of Appeal case earlier this year where judges in the Court of Appeal said we're going to discourage courts from imposing short-term custodial sentences because of prison overcrowding. It's been a perfect storm of a reduction in funding in real terms, the end of the backlog which built up over COVID, and also changes in sentencing regimes which mean right or wrong, dangerous, or those categorised as dangerous offenders automatically are serving 2/3 of a sentence rather than a half.
Yeah, OK, that clearly makes a difference. I mean, in the government's defence, looking at the numbers, you know, the prison population is 88,000, and that is 10,000 more than it was 2 years ago. So when Steve Barclay or the others are doing the rounds, saying, no, we've done more than any government in modern times to increase prison places, they're right. And I understand sentences going from a half to 2/3, which I'm sure, you know, our viewers would agree with. And yet, isn't the truth of it that the criminal base in this country is growing as well?
Not necessarily. Part of the other side of this is what happens before a trial. So previously, you would expect, in line with what's called a custody time limit, for someone not to spend more than 6 months in prison awaiting trial. That's almost doubled in the last 3 years. That contributes to it as well. As a nation, we're only slightly above average for the number of people in prison per capita.
Yeah.
And so I don't think you can necessarily say it's as a result of there being more crime. It's as a result of a change in approach that people are spending more time in prison.
So clearly, I mean, you know, it's funny, isn't it? We get, you know, hundreds of young men on a calm day cross the English Channel. It seems that we can find accommodation for them, and yet from next week there'll be rapists, convicted rapists walking around, you know, waiting for a prison space, effectively. So isn't the answer to this, if we're going to have longer sentences, even though we've improved on a number of places, we've got to build more prisons? And didn't the recent jailbreak, you know, from Wandsworth show that actually these creaking Victorian prisons aren't really fit for purpose?
Well, they're not fit for purpose at all, and there's two problems with that. First of all is the infrastructure. As you say, I mean, Wandsworth Prison, I know you won't have been, but
no,
creaking
no, thank you.
is the word. But the other side of that as well is the staffing that we have. If you looked at the graphs that we have as to how many years prison staff have been in the occupation, the split between those between 1 and 4 years and those far more senior has absolutely...
The senior guys have gone, replaced by new people. It is a mess. Rhys Rosser, thank you for coming in and joining us. The What the Farage moment is the sheer gutlessness of the Football Association. You see the famous Wembley Arch. When the Ukrainian invasion happened, well, up goes the arch in Ukrainian lights. And, you know, when we had the atrocities, the horrible terrorist atrocities in France, well, we get the French flag, and it's there, and it's very, very clear. And then, of course, we get the LGBT+Q flag. That goes up when the World Cup's been playing in Qatar. And our footballers, our national team, take the knee to Black Lives Matter, who turned out to be a complete bunch of wrong-uns who weren't really campaigning for racial justice. And yet, after the attack on Israel, the Football Association firmly will not put the Israeli flag up on the Wembley Arch. This actually is part of the appeasement that Josh Howie was talking about with such passion at the beginning of this programme. The FA are plain wrong. What has happened in Israel was unwarranted and absolutely appalling in every way. Now, as you know, we do Farage at Large. We go out round the country with live audiences, and we haven't done one for a bit because of a summer break. Well, we're back on the road, and here's the first one. And you better, if you want to come and you live nearby, get ready. You can see the pictures there on the television. We are going to be, in 2 weeks' time, 2 weeks today, in St Austell, in Cornwall. If you want to come, go to gbnews.com. If you really want to come, if you haven't done it, by later on tonight, every single space will have gone. And that's because we keep the audiences to about 150, 160, so that people actually get involved. Come to St Austell in 2 weeks' time. If you want to come, you live down that way, gbnews.com. In a moment, why, oh why are we giving in? Why do we want to make the Grand National? Why are we trying to downgrade it by making the fences easier, fewer horses? As regular watchers of this programme will know, I was there this year. There are bigger problems, frankly, from disruptors these days than there are from the fences.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Regular viewers will know that I went to the Grand National this year, having before had a conversation with one of the guys that disrupted it. And I was back here on the Monday. Well, the fact that I was at the National, I loved it, but I was absolutely furious that these idiots had caused those horses, as I saw it, to sweat up, giving us more fallers and withdrawals at the first and second fence than we'd had combined for the last 7 or 8 years since the fences were changed. And of course, Hill 16, one of the favourites, fell and was put down at the first. Well, I'm joined by Oliver Sherwood, Grand National winning trainer in 2015 with many clouds. Oliver, what happened this year was bad for the animals, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to lose any horse is bad, you know. I'm adamant in my own mind, and I think most trainers or most people involved in the industry would admit that those people caused the death of that horse. Yeah. Those animals are trained to the second, and some of them did boil over.
There's no question about it. And yet, we understand this morning that there's a big review of the Grand National. They want to limit the number of horses from 40 to 34. They want to take the 11th fence down by a couple of inches. They want to pull the start line back so the horses aren't going at quite the same pace when they go to the first. And it seems to me that to bring in these changes now is we're almost doing it because of the protests. It's almost like we're giving in. We're trying to take the Grand National, which, you know, we discussed this before the programme. It's a global event, isn't it, the Grand National?
Totally. As we were saying, discussing beforehand, when I was lucky enough to win the National, I did so many interviews post-race, post-days on my phone. And I always they asked me, would I always want to win the Grand National? I said, well, actually, no, I wanted to win the Cheltenham Gold Cup. And virtually every single one said, what's that? But the Grand National is a global event.
Yeah.
And I would like to reiterate that this has all been industry-led. It's not a knee-jerk reaction. After every national, they do have a debrief, and even after I won it with Many Clouds, they debriefed a lot of trainers and got a consensus of opinion over trying to improve the race every little bit. I think it's sad. I'm a bit of a traditionalist to bring it down from 40 to 34, but I see where they're coming from.
But they're appeasing a lobby. I mean, this race...
To the do-gooders.
This race has been going since, I think it's 1837, I think it is the first national. And they're appeasing, not just do-gooders, they're appeasing a group of people who actually want to end jump racing.
Oh, absolutely. And we mustn't forget that these animals, what do you do them if they want to stop racing, national hunt racing? I do fear for it, not in our lifetime, God willing, but I do fear for national hunt racing. I do think it's sad. I'm more concerned about some statements the likes of the RSPCA have come out and saying this is the start of something. They might make changes for later on. So who's to say in 5 years' time they're going to bring it down from 34 to 30 to 25? They'll reduce the fences down to even smaller and then later on. And then it's a non-event.
Yeah, I can say, then it becomes like any other jump race.
Yeah, it won't be the Grand National, it'll be the English National over smaller fences, and it's not the same. Wherever there is animals, wherever you get livestock, you get dead stock. End of story. My father told me that years ago. Yeah. And it's a risk for us to walk out onto the road. It's a risk for horses. Do they want to
and they're
take
away? Also, they're bred for this.
To be competitive.
They're bred for this.
What are you going to do
for this? And they love it, don't they?
They love it. You get the majority. Some of them don't, and they're moved on to other disciplines.
Yeah.
But the majority of them are competitive, like you and I. We like being competitive. Yeah. We like to beat somebody at a game of squash or a game of darts or whatever. We are naturally competitive. So are those racehorses.
Yeah,
you take that away from them, I think it's a very, very sad state of affairs.
Yeah, no, I do. And overall, you know, what is the state of the sport? I mean, I guess without, maybe this applies more to the flat, but without all the money coming in from the billionaire sheikhs, it would be struggling, wouldn't it?
But as we were again discussing beforehand, the money in the game, people spending on horses, forget flat racing for a second, into jumpers, is astronomical. And people are spending money. It is a hobby for the owners. The flat is a bit more of a business. They're buying them, and they've got two quite important parts of the anatomy, the flat people, to become stallions and cover mares and carry on that tradition. The jumping people don't. And as I say, it's a hobby. It's like you and I being a member of a golf club, but much more expensive, obviously.
Yeah.
And the owners, we mustn't forget how many people it employs, from the stable staff, from the owners, the farriers, the vets, the people who work on the racecourses. It goes on for a long, long time. And to lose all that would be a sad... But you can't argue with those sort of people who want to stop the game, because they would argue that black is white.
And if you had to say to a viewer who'd never been to watch, jump racing, where would you recommend? Where would be a good place to go to watch it if you'd never been before?
First of all, come to a yard.
Yeah.
To a yard where the horses are kept. I won't go down, because everybody knows in the game that they are kept as like being in a five-star hotel. Yeah. That's not part... Just to see them. But I say you can't appease them. You cannot sort of... You can't... they just cannot relate. They can't relate to it. And then take them to the race courses. They don't understand the mentality of a horse, those people. I personally think sometimes we're banging our head against a brick wall, but what we do want them to do is occasionally stand up to these people, and as you said earlier, not just let them walk all over us.
This is what I think is happening.
But this does worry me that you said they've gone from from 40 to 34.
I know.
They have. I'm not adverse to them bringing the first fence or the start closer to the first fence.
Well, we want to see the cavalry charge, don't we?
We do.
That's the Grand National, for goodness sake.
Absolutely right. We're both traditionalists like that, and that's part of the fun of it.
Yeah. No,
OK, you do get. Well, there hasn't been a death for 6 years. I don't want to say that the whole time, but you do get them. You get them in every day.
Well, I think we all know what killed Hill 16 this year.
100%
I think we agree on that. And finally, Oliver, tell me, what's it like? You know, you've trained this horse.
I've ridden in it as well.
You've ridden it. I know you did before, but you've trained this horse, and it wins the Grand National. It's got to be pretty cool.
It's the best thing I've ever done in training. I was training for 39 years, and it's the best thing I've ever done. It was life-changing. And I mean that because I'm always known now as a Grand National winning trainer.
They can't take it away from you. No question. Oliver Sherwood, thank you for joining me. Now, I've been on this debanking crusade, and there have been some warm words from the British government, and the FCA had a review. It was pretty unsatisfactory, but there is, I'm told, more to come. But it's happening everywhere. Can you believe that ING Bank in Germany have now said, we will not open an account for you. In fact, we will close your account if you're a business that is not committed to reducing your carbon dioxide output. And in the NAB Bank in Australia, they will close your account if you say things that are mean. I wonder, Jacob Rees-Mogg, do you say things that are mean could lead you to you being debanked?
I very rarely say things that are mean. But the whole concept of mean, I left the schoolyard some decades ago. It just seems particularly wet. And the green thing from ING is really very sinister. This is, you see, we saw this with Rishi's really important announcement and the drawing back of some of the green promises and the admission of some of the cost. The green zealotry will not happen without forcing people to behave in a particular way. And that requires all sorts of institutions to make our lives less easy to live. And ING is just admitting that to get to net zero, you're going to have to debank people who force people. And it'll be true of other things. We'll have to fly less, we'll have to drive less. The Climate Change Committee has put out a report today saying it's disappointed that Rishi Sunak isn't encouraging demand changes. Well, that means all the things he was accused of making up, like not eating meat. So they're back on to all of that. It's about controlling and changing your life, and ING
they never
stop.
Given
the game away.
I'm afraid so. In brief, Jacob, tonight...
What are we going to talk about? We've got Lord Wolfson on to talk about the letter sent by the lawyers. Really important letter to the BBC, trying to find out why they've made this random decision not to say terrorist when they used the term the whole time.
About all sorts of people.
About all sorts of people. It's clearly political.
Absolutely. Jacob Rees-Mogg in a moment. Well, that's it for this week. I'm back with you live at 7 o'clock on Monday evening. Have a great weekend. Let's hope the weather's good.
Hello, I'm Alex Burkle. Here's your latest GB News weather update. It's going to turn wet and windy as we go through tonight into tomorrow, but then something colder is on the way as we go into the weekend. We have an area of low pressure to the southwest of the UK, and it's this that's going to track across England and Wales as we go through tonight into Friday, bringing some heavy rain and strong winds. Further north, there will be some showery rain pushing its way southwards, and with low pressure nearby, northern parts of Scotland are going to be blustery and windy as we go through the night as well. Could be a little bit chilly for some parts of Scotland, milder further south, temperatures in the mid-teens Celsius, but it is going to be a wet and windy start to Friday. And staying wet and windy as we go through much of the day. The heavy rain could cause some problems on the roads, some spray is quite likely, and when you factor in those strong winds, we're likely to see a bit of disruption. The high totals of rain, particularly over the Welsh mountains, could lead to some flooding, and there's the risk of some thunder across southern parts as well. Staying quite warm in the south though, temperatures in the low 20s here, colder further north, even though it will be brighter and sunnier with some showers. Into Saturday, a chilly, perhaps frosty start for many of us, then plenty of showers feeding down on cold northerly winds. So it's particularly towards the northeast of Scotland where they'll be most frequent and heaviest, but they are going to become a bit more widespread as we go through the afternoon. Even the chance of some winteriness over Scotland before Sunday and Monday